Audible.
Okay, first we'll see dobutamine stress echocardiography, and then we'll go to low flow, low gradient AS. Coming to brief, like what are the modalities of stress testing, which includes either exercise stress imaging or pharmacological stress imaging. Pharmacological stress imaging includes dobutamine or vasodilators, exercise either bicycle or treadmill. So today we'll be discussing on dobutamine stress echocardiography. Basic physiology is it stimulates beta 1 receptors, which increases heart rate and also increases the contractility. Like when do we do this dobutamine DAC instead of exercise is like if patient is unable to perform the exercise, and if even this is preferred modality for viability assessment in compared to the exercise ESC, exercise stress echocardiography. And the basic physiology is it increases the myocardial oxygen demand and increases the cardiac contractility. That's why we'll assess the hemodynamic responses, like heart rate, how based on increase in heart rate, based on how is the stroke volume, how is the ejection fraction, and we can also assess the myocardial blood flow, like based on the perfusion stress imaging, like that is the help of vasodilators and with myocardial ultrasound enhancing agents, contrast agents. What are the contraindications? Contraindications are significant LVOT obstruction like HCM with LVOT obstruction, or severe symptomatic AS, even asymptomatic severe AS with the if gradient mean gradient is more than 40, that is also contraindication. And unstable or in recent ACS, like within 48 to 72 hours with ACS, DSC is contraindicated. And serious arrhythmias, and if BP is more than, systolic BP is more than 180 or diastolic BP is more than 110, these are the contraindications. We'll come to this in details in next page. So why do we need stress imaging? Basically, it's based on the ischemia cascade, the principle of ischemia cascade. Myocardial ischemia is classically characterized by a time sequence of series of events which are consistent every time. Like if before start this ischemia starts with abnormal perfusion and metabolic changes, followed by diastolic dysfunction, then followed by RWMA, and then ECG changes, and later angina. So if we do stress imaging, we are very far up in the ischemia cascade, in the initial region of the ischemia cascade, so that we can detect this ischemia early before the onset of ECG changes or angina. This DAC is alternate to exercise, especially when patient is unable to perform, and it's also preferable when viability assessment is needed. How do we do this test? Dobutamine is started at dose of 5 mics per kg per minute and gradually increased at 3 minutes interval, like to 10, 20, and 30 and 40. And we do low dose dobutamine, especially while we need to assess the myocardial viability. We'll start with the 2.5 mics per kg per minute. And when target heart rate is not achieved, then we'll also give injection atropine at the dose of 0.25 to 0.5 mg at 1 minute interval to achieve this target heart rate. And this atropine, it's better to give when we are in a stage of dobutamine infusion at like 20 to 30 mics per kg per minute, so that we can achieve the target heart rate early compared to giving at 40, waiting for 40 mics per kg per minute, and if target heart rate is not achieved, and then giving atropine, so that the duration of the test also gets shortened, and the total effective dose of dobutamine that we have given to the patient also is relatively reduced, such that avoiding some VPCs or atrial arrhythmias. So what are the endpoints of termination? And one more thing, like especially if patient is on beta blockers, then we may require a higher dose of dobutamine. That's why people are advised to stop beta blockers 24 hours, but some people also tell that stopping beta blockers sometimes can cause adverse events. Endpoints of termination are a target heart rate after achieving the target heart rate, or if either patient develops hypotension or hypertension, or if RWMA is detected, or worsening of RWMA and significant arrhythmias or severe hypertension and intolerable symptoms. So these contraindications we have already discussed: MI within 3 days, unstable angina, LVOT obstruction, HCM, SBP more than 180, DBP more than 100, aortic dissection, ventricular arrhythmias. So what if arrhythmias or hypertension or any adverse events occurs during DSC? In that case, we have to stop the dobutamine immediately, and after that BP will come down, and even the arrhythmias like VPCs and atrial arrhythmias may come down after stopping the dobutamine. If in case the patient is hemodynamically unstable, then we may need to treat him. And if VTs are very frequent, VPCs are complicated. If at the DSC, then we can even give IV beta blockers. So you should have IV esmolol or IV metoprolol in hand. If any sustained VT occurs, this can be due to ischemia also. This is the diagram showing the protocol of DSC. And coming to what are the normal responses and what are the ischemic responses for various stress modalities, we focus on dobutamine. Dobutamine normal is it will cause marked hyperkinesis and it increases the velocity, that rate of contraction of the myocardium compared to rest. The stress dose is what we say stress dose of dobutamine is like high dose, like 30 to 40 mics per kg per minute, whereas low dose is 5 to 10 mics per kg per minute. Okay, and what is the ischemic response? Ischemic response is either hypokinesis and decreased contractility at the low dose compared to the rest. And this can be ischemic response can be regional or global. What is the ischemic global response? Ischemic global response is decrease in EF and cavity dilatation. This LV cavity end diastolic volume will increase, especially in case of multivascular left main. What is the normal global response? That is decrease in end diastolic volume. There is a small difference between the exercise stress echocardiography and pharmacological this DSC. In exercise, because of increased venous return, the EDV will also increase. But whereas in dobutamine, it's only mainly dobutamine will cause slight vasodilator response. Apart from that, it will increase the heart rate and increase the contractility. That's why EDV will decrease. And along with that, there is a marked decrease in ESV. However, EF is a relative thing. That's why marked increase in EF will be noted. Stroke volume may decrease or it may not change much. So this physiology we have already discussed. It's a beta 2 beta receptor. Beta 1 receptor will increase the cardiac contractility, whereas beta 2 receptors will cause peripheral vasodilatation. Overall, this will increase the myocardial oxygen consumption and cause marked hyperkinesis, which predominantly increases the heart rate and contractility. And stroke volume may decrease or may not change. End diastolic volume decreases. End systolic volume decreases markedly, and overall EF increases. And a small note on ultrasound enhancing agents, that is ultrasound echo contrast agents. There is role of this UEAs, what we call. There are three types of three brands of these contrast agents which are available in the market. One is Definitive, which we have in our echo lab, and the other is Optison, and the third one is Lumason. We give at very like prescribed doses along with the small slow saline flushes, or we can either give with dilution as an infusion. That is, when do we use these contrast agents, especially if the echo window is poor and you are not able to make out the two contiguous segments of the myocardium, then it is better to use this myocardial enhanced ultrasound contrast agents. So how do we use this? We, after giving either infusion or bolus followed by giving stat dose followed by bolus of saline, we will reduce the mechanical index to 0.2, less than 0.2. But before that, if in case you want to destroy the contrast agents within the myocardium, then we can transiently increase this mechanical index to 0.8 and then again come back to 0.2, so that the LV opacification will be optimal. The contrast in the myocardium will be lost and the contrast within the LV cavity will be retained, so that the endocardial border and this RWMA are easily seen. This indication of this use is class 1, and this indication if there is a poor window or if you are not unable to make out the two contiguous segments. Coming to what are the recommendations, how do you report this stress echocardiogram? So you should make note on what is a baseline RWMA, is there any stress induced RWMA, and what type of stress protocol we use. Generally this topic is DSC, so you should mention that about DSC, and what are the heart rate changes. And during performing this DSC, you should have continuous ECG monitoring, and you should also do echocardiography continuously, so that even sometimes the initial part of low dose dobutamine initial stages, there may be transient RWMA and which improvement in wall motion and which may deteriorate. So that transient period should not be missed. So that's why you should do continuously echocardiography, and you should also assess the symptoms and BP. And you should also, in the reporting format, should have the diagrams representing the segments, and you should also mention about the wall motion index score. So overall, you should report as either normal, ischemic. Is there any like fixed wall motion abnormality or a combination? This wall motion score index. This diagram shows segments, various segments of 17 segment model showing blood supply to corresponding segments. This wall motion score index is calculated by wall motion scoring of that segment plus you should plus overall you will average for the 17 segments. So for one is normal or hyperkinesis, that is systolic increase in thickening is more than 50%, and hypokinesis is systolic thickening is between 10 to 15%, 50%, and akinesis is systolic thickening is less than 10%, and dyskinesis is paradoxical systolic motion, and aneurysmal is the diastolic deformation. And rather than looking only at the excursion of this myocardial segment, it should specifically look for the change in thickness. That is what wall motion score index specifically stress upon. Coming to what are the indications of DSC, one is main is detection of ischemia, other is viability assessment under CAD, and in that way you can detect RWMA. You can also grade the RWMA and assess the stress, assess this RWMA at stress and at recovery, and you can also do perfusion assessment at especially with the use of this ultrasound enhancing agents, and you can also like have suspicion of multivessel CAD, especially if there is transient ischemic dilatation and increase in end diastolic volume, and risk stratification, especially if RV ischemia present or not. So it can so we can use for early detection and risk stratification and also viability assessment in CAD. And valvular heart disease, there is some role in MS, especially in AS, that to low flow, low gradient AS, and MR. And other indications are assessment of stratifying pulmonary hypertension and pre-transplant evaluation, stress echo for evaluation of dyspnea, and LBBB. These are a group of patients where exercise electrocardiography has no role because of baseline ECG changes. That's why DSA has a good role. And preoperative risk stratification also. And the DSC in children and young adults, various indications are Kawasaki. Especially you can avoid so much of radiation exposure compared to that of nuclear imaging. Kawasaki TGA post ASO, that is arterial switch operations, and the post cardiac transplantation, and anomalous coronaries and familial hyperlipidemia also. And other is radiation induced CAD. DSC is better probably because of already patient is had much of radiation exposure, and you can avoid so much radiation exposure by nuclear imaging. And this is ischemia assessment. It has similar sensitivity or slightly lower sensitivity compared to that of nuclear imaging, because it depends upon the echo window of the patient, but it has high specificity compared to that of nuclear imaging. We report this based on 17 segment model, and if you are comparing either 16 segment or 17 segment, especially we report based on 17 segment model. If you are comparing with other stress imaging modalities, the 17 segment model is preferred. And how do you interpret this stress echocardiography in ischemia assessment? Normal is at rest, the contractility will be normal, and at the stress it will be hyperkinetic contractility. Whereas in ischemia, it can be it is normal at the rest, which can worsen to hypokinetic, akinetic, or dyskinetic, or it can be hypokinetic at the rest, which worsens to akinetic or dyskinetic. This is ischemic response. And in fact, there is a baseline hypokinetic, akinetic, or dyskinetic regional wall motion abnormality at rest, and there will not be much change at this stress. Sometimes this akinetic can become dyskinetic, but that is of not much importance. And the viability testing is, it will be akinetic at the rest, but improves to hypokinetic or normal. There will be even viability can have biphasic response, like at the transient low doses of dobutamine DSC, it can have improvement in this contractility, and with the further increase in dopamine infusion, dopamine stress, it can become hypokinetic also. Coming to DSC, that viability assessment, so before going for viability assessment, you should do resting echo, that is baseline echo, and what are the features suggestive of no viability or our patient doesn't improve with revascularization, that is extensive Q wave on ECG or marked LV enlargement, dilated LV, grade 3 or grade 4 diastolic dysfunction, and extensive scar, that is the thickness, the baseline thickness itself is less than 6 mm with increased echogenicity. It implies that scar has already formed. And DSC, it stimulates contraction in dysfunctional but viable myocardium and provide more accurate information on potential recovery. So this is based on the contractile reserve. So what is contractile reserve? Augmentation of contractility of severely hypokinetic or akinetic segment can be elicited by dobutamine when resting blood flow is modestly decreased, enabling detection of hibernating myocardium. But however, if blood flow is severely decreased in setting of severely reduced blood flow or no this coronary flow reserve, hibernating myocardium may manifest as this contractile reserve will be low. That's why at the initial low dose dobutamine, there will be some transient improvement in the contractility, but with the increasing in dobutamine dose, that is increased myocardial contractility or increased oxygen demand, this severely stenosed artery is the artery and reduced coronary flow reserve, there will be deterioration of the contractility. That is, this is called as a biphasic response. So DSC protocol, it is similar to the stress, but you start at the low dose, that is 2.5 mics per kg per minute, and then gradually switch over to 5, 7.5, and then 10. So the length of each infusion stage can be adjusted based on the observed contractility response and hemodynamics. Continuous echocardiography should be done. And if the patient is on beta blockers, then we have maybe patient requires little higher dose even for the viability assessment, that is 15 to 20 mics. And continuous monitoring of ECG, and you should also look for STT changes and arrhythmias. Then after doing this low dose, then you have to proceed to the stress dose of dobutamine to increase the sensitivity of identification of ischemia. For example, if patient is having hibernating myocardium in one territory and some borderline disease in the other territory, then even the other territory ischemic response also can be detected. That's why, so you should start with the low dose and then go for the high dose. So in a nutshell, low dose dobutamine is a test for viability. Intermediate dose of dobutamine is required if patient is on beta blocker, and high dose, it detects the flow limiting CAD. So what is the accuracy of DSC for viability? Sensitivity is around 75 to 80% and specificity is 80 to 85%. And why do we get false negative tests? It's because hibernating region with the disrupted contractile proteins. For example, chronic hibernating myocardium, which has myocardial proteins are lost, or because of apoptosis or abnormal contractile proteins, this can cause a false negative. Though there is chance of viability after revascularization, but this is not detected in this DSC. And hibernating myocardium with a severe stenosis, that's what may not respond to dobutamine, and contractile response is transient or and small degree, and we cannot detect by visual assessment. So this can be missed. That's why false negative can be present. And compared to DSC for global function or outcome after revascularization, sensitivity is around 86 to 90%, and it has very high sensitivity compared to the nuclear scan also, and the reasonable specificity is around 71 to 90%. And you can also assess the degree of global functional improvement based on the number of segments with the contractile reserve. This improvement in global function depends upon number of segments with the contractile reserve, that minimum at least 4 to 5 segments with the dysfunctional segments with the contractile reserve. If they are present, then after revascularization, there are much chance of global functional improvement and much better outcomes. And if the magnitude of the wall motion score index, if it is that too, if it is akinetic but improving with the low dose stress test, then this magnitude, this good magnitude compared to hypokinetic to recovery. So increase in EF with a low dose DSC. These are all the parameters which predict the global improvement in function. And coming to quantitative assessment of the viability, so this is based on if increase in basal segment displacement of more than 5 mm or increase in EF of more than 5%, and other parameters include strain parameters and the tissue Doppler index. If this strain imaging with low dose DSC, if these parameters improves, then there are high chances of global functional improvement. So what is the current status of viability? We have already discussed regarding viability assessment. One is STITCH trial, which studied about ischemic cardiomyopathy patients undergoing CABG EF less than 35. They have categorized to CABG versus viability, and sub-study there are group of patients in whom viability was also assessed either by SPECT or DSC, but viability was not independent predictor of death or 5-year mortality. There are various other trials which you can go through. And coming to what are the response of dysfunctional myocardium to dobutamine, like stunned myocardium, hibernating myocardium, and mixture of stunned hibernating myocardium. So stunned myocardium with a low dose, this stunned and hibernating myocardium, especially at low dose, this indicates that possibility of viability, like possibility of improvement after revascularization. That's why low dose there will be transient improvement, and for stunned myocardium, and hibernating myocardium generally improves at rest, and sometimes it may not change also, because if it is a chronically hibernating myocardium with severe stenosis and at high dose, it may, in both the conditions, it can decrease, but in stunned myocardium, if with the high dose, sometimes even it may improve also. Coming to the imaging, other imaging modalities of viability assessment includes this magnetic resonance imaging, nuclear imaging, SPECT and SPECT FDGs. Okay, what are the recommendations of stress echocardiography? Recommendations are invasive testing for IHD, or risk stratification of IHD, or reassessment of patients with a stable CAD, and as a non-invasive stress testing in patients with who are unable to perform exercise for stable ischemic heart disease. So coming to the non-invasive testing for ischemia detection in patients with a suspected CAD, but that is with intermediate pretest probability and preserved ejection fraction, then stress echocardiography is preferred as initial test option. And in patients with a high pretest probability and reduced LVEF, even without typical angina, this DSC is a class 1 recommendation. And in suspected patients with resting ECG abnormalities in whom interpreting the exercise electrocardiography is not possible, it is also a class 1 indication, and also in LBBV patients. And even in women, because of this nuclear imaging has some attenuation, breast attenuation artifacts, that's why this exercise echocardiography is also preferred compared, or stress echocardiography is preferred. And DSC is recommended in patients who are unable to perform exercise also. And especially coming to diastolic functional assessment, which we have already discussed, exercise stress echocardiography is that with bicycle ergometry is a choice of assessment. And coming to risk stratification in patients who are unable to perform exercise, then stress echocardiography is used in patients with inconclusive exercise ECG. Inconclusive ECG are patients who are unable to perform exercise. And the other thing is in asymptomatic patients with diabetes, peripheral vascular disease, or strong family history, that is high risk patients, when previous risk assessment testing suggested of high risk CAD and CAC more than 400, stress imaging, especially stress echocardiography, may be considered as an advanced cardiovascular test for risk assessment, that is class 2B. Coming to reassessment of stable CAD who have already undergone angiography or revascularization, when they are coming for follow-up, if they are having symptoms, then DSC is also class 1 indication. And for non-invasive testing in patients with for IHD, especially if patients functional capacity is less than 4 meds, and if you want to undergo any surgery, then this DSC can also be used for risk stratification before giving fitness for surgeries. And coming to DSC in valvular heart disease, exercise echo is generally preferable, but if a patient is unable to perform exercise, then we can consider DSC. Especially in coming to use of DSC in MS, if there are discrepancy between symptoms and echo parameters, or if patient is asymptomatic but echo gradient is right, then we can perform this DSC to elicit the symptoms also. That is especially for exercise echo. And if the mean gradient during performing this DSC, if the gradient increases to more than 18 mean gradient, then it is a high risk independent predictor of the MACE. And if PASP also increases more than 60, that is also independent predictor of MACE. And coming to ASC, you should note that in patients with a severe symptomatic AS, there is no role of any DSC, and even in asymptomatic severe AS, when the gradient is more than 40, there is no role of DSC. We use this DSC especially in patients with low flow, low gradient AS. These people constitutes about 35% of the total severe AS patients. So it is especially used to differentiate this classical low flow, low gradient patients. That is with low gradient is less because of LV dysfunction, to differentiate from true stenosis and pseudostenosis, and also to risk stratify this true classical low flow, low gradient patients with contractile reserve or flow reserve. If flow reserve is more than 20%, that is, they have better prognosis compared to patients with low flow reserve. And dobutamine echo in MR, if there is increase in EROA by 10 mm per meter square, or increase in regurgitant volume by more than 15, then it predicts the symptom-free survival and increased MACE events. And if EF improvement is more than 4%, that is contractile reserve, then post-operative improvement in EF is also predicted. Like if this contractile reserve is absent, then there are more chance of deteriorating LV function after surgery, after MV replacement. And also for assessing the pulmonary hypertension, if symptomatic assessment, or if PASP is more than 60 during stress, it also has some unfavorable prognosis. The next topic is low flow, low gradient AS. We'll discuss this in very brief, like what we can write in exam. So what is severe AS? Severe AS is if all these three parameters are present, there is no ambiguity, and you can definitely say it is a severe AS. That is, aortic valve area is less than 1 centimeter square, mean gradient is more than 40, and peak jet velocity is more than 4 meters per second. What if there is only one parameter is present or one other parameter is absent? There will be some ambiguity or discordance. That's why we can miss this diagnosis of severe AS. So we should also measure, apart from the mean gradient or jet velocity, we should always measure the aortic valve area. So if generally in our routine busy echo practice, people tend to measure the only velocity or mean gradient and avoid doing this cumbersome aortic valve area measurements. If it is like that, we can miss up to 35% of the severe AS patients who require the definite surgery and who will have definite improvement after surgery. So low gradient AS is if the mean gradient is less than 40 mm, but aortic valve area is less than 1 centimeter square. So there are two, all parameters are not satisfied for definitely defining them to be severe AS. So that's why other entity came to mean, that is low gradient severe AS. So then what should we do? We should calculate the stroke volume index, and we should also calculate the EF. So if EF is less than 50%, or stroke volume index is less than 35 ml per meter square, then we should further assess them. So this low flow, low gradient AS constitutes about 15 to 35% of symptomatic patients. We have already discussed, if we tend to measure only mean gradient, then there are high chances that we will miss at least 1/3 of severe AS patients in our routine practice. So this low flow, low gradient AS are classified into, broadly can be classified into three headings. That is classical low flow, low gradient AS. That these people will have low EF. That's why this gradient is not high, even though they have reduced low aortic valve area, that is less than 1 centimeter square. These people constitute about 5 to 10% of severe AS. The other is normal ejection fraction, but they also have low flow and low gradient. It's because of some abnormality in the myocardial LV wall. That is, they develop because of the restrictive physiology and reduced LV volumes. They will have low flow and low gradient. And this people constitute about 10 to 25% of the AS, and there is another entity called as normal flow low gradient AS. That is, these people have normal EF, and even the normal flow, that is stroke volume index, is more than 35 ml per meter square, but the mean gradient is less than 40. We'll come to the reason for this in the coming at the end of the discussion. This complete overview of this severe stenosis. Severe stenosis.
1 second. Sorry to interrupt you. So I just I wanted to discuss this. So when we are seeing suppose severe AS case, okay, rheumatic or any degenerative, okay. Suppose we are we are in the echo, we are seeing that LV is contracting well and EF is 50%. Mean gradient is 50. Okay. But still we should calculate aortic wall area by continuity equation, no?
Continuity equation should always be measured, like irrespective of normal ejection fraction or reduced ejection fraction, the gradient.
Correct. So after that only we should
go high flow situations, especially like anemia, thyrotoxicosis, hyperdynamic circulation patients, though they are having moderate AS, sometimes gradient can be high also. That's why you should calculate the aortic valve area.
Because what we do is in MS, we see gradient and we also see planimetry. But what we usually do with AS is if we find LV contractility is good and mean gradient is more than 40, then we don't see we don't calculate the aortic wall area often. That is what.
It is said that this discordance can be in 10% of people. Like this severe AS, the gradient can be more than 40, and valve area is also more than 1. These people constitute about 10%.
Correct.
That is especially patients with this hyperdynamic flow states.
Correct.
And even the planimetry with the TTE is not indicated, like because it has low sensitivity. That's why if you are performing TEA and it is advisable to calculate the planimetry. With the TTE, we should use only continuity equation to calculate the aortic valve area.
Okay. Thank you.
With the TE, even with the 2D, it can be calculated, Venkatesh?
No. No, you should not calculate with the 2D aortic valve area planimetry.
3D TE, no?
3D TE is okay. I'm telling 2D. Coming to this complete overview of severe aortic stenosis. Severe aortic stenosis can be classified as high gradient severe aortic stenosis, that is normally described, and the other entity is low gradient severe aortic stenosis. So high gradient is aortic valve area is less than 1 and mean gradient is also more than 40. So the other, how do you proceed with that? You should have a assessment with the surgical heart team. If the risk is low risk for surgery, then SAVR is a class 1 indication. If these patients are intermediate risk based on Euro score or STS score, then either SAVR or TAVI is depends upon the heart team. Both are class 1 indications. And if it is high risk and prohibitive risk, then TAVI is a class 1 indication. Coming to low gradient severe aortic stenosis, these people will have area of less than 1 and mean gradient of less than 40. So then you should go with you should assess the LVEF. If LVEF is less than 50%, it is described as classical low flow, low gradient AS. This low flow is because of reduced LV function. But you should also rule out the measurement errors because these people, though they are having LVEF less than 50%, sometimes their aortic valve area can be more than 1, like moderate aortic stenosis with LV dysfunction. So you should measure this aortic valve area with continuity equation with as per steps that was suggested. So then next step is to perform low dose dobutamine stress echo. If with the DSC, if the mean gradient increases to more than 40 mmHg, it implies that it is a true severe aortic stenosis. With the low dose of dobutamine, this EF has improved. That's improved, causing increase in mean gradient of more than 40. So if still in another group of patients, if still mean gradient is less than 40, then the other thing is like even though you are giving low dose dobutamine, these people contractile reserve is either less such that they are unable to increase their gradient to more than 40. So either you can use projected aortic valve area based on that will come in next page. And our other thing is MDCT calcium scores. If MDCT calcium score is more than 1200 in women or more than 2000 in men, they are high likely to have severe AS. And there is another subgroup of patients in whom this gradient is less than 40, but aortic valvaria is it is 40 because it's moderate stenosis, and aortic valvaria also increases to more than 1. That is because with the increase in flow or with increase in contractility, this aortic valves open properly, adequately, and this AVA is calculated as more than 1. So these people doesn't need any like surgical management. Heart failure therapy and medical management is sufficient. Coming to another group of patients with normal EF but low flow. Low flow is because of reduced stroke volume index or normal stroke volume index also. This low gradient AS with normal LV function can be again categorized as paradoxical low flow low gradient or normal flow, and the second group is normal flow low gradient. Coming to paradoxical low flow low gradient, this can be because of measurements errors also. So you should first rule out measurement errors, and the next you should assess the symptoms. If symptoms are there, then mostly they are because of severe AS. If symptoms are equivocal, then you can perform exercise or stress echo, especially if there is no restrictive physiology. And if there are no symptoms, then you can follow up the patients. And the third step is you should assess the contributory factors which are causing the reduction in the gradient, though they're having a reduced aortic valve area. That those factors are hypertension. If systolic blood pressure is more than 140, there are high chances that the gradient is less than can be less than 40 than expected. Other parameters like other valve abnormalities affecting the aortic flow also, like MS, MR, TR or RV dysfunction and AF also. And then fourth step is CT assessment for calcium score or dobutamine stress if there is no restrictive physiology. If all these parameters suggest true severe AS, then you should go with the management as per surgical team, which we already discussed, like low risk SAVR, intermediate risk SAVR or TAVI. For its high risk TAVI. Coming to the other group, normal flow low gradient AS. This group we have normal flow, that is stroke volume index is more than 35 ml per meter square, and even EF is also normal, but even then the gradient is less than 40. This is because if what we are taking the cutoff of 1 always may not correspond to the mean gradient of 40. Sometimes there are, if generally if 0.8 centimeters square corresponds to the cutoff of 40, there are some patients for whom there is this gap of low gradient. Another thing is for patients with like thin patients, even then these people have normal flow and low gradient also, and we'll come to these details at the end. Okay. And these people, you should all these 4 steps, like you should rule out measurements errors, you should also assess the symptoms, and then you should also assess the contributory factors, and then you should perform the MDCT. If MDCT is suggestive of severe AS, then you should go with the surgical management. Otherwise, you can follow up with medical management. So coming to, we have already discussed in detail in single flowchart. We'll discuss individually. Echo, you should assess this mean gradient or velocity. There are 2 parameters of telling severe AS. One is the flow dependent variable, the other is flow independent variable. The flow dependent variables are this mean gradient and velocity. These are flow dependent variables. That's why these parameters depends upon the LV function also. And the flow independent variable is aortic valve area. Okay. And that's why if you regularly perform echo and only check for the mean gradient and jet velocity, you will classify them as moderate AS instead of classifying them as a severe gradient if you miss doing the aortic valve area. So you should measure the both, and we'll go in step by step how to calculate this aortic valve area. So this Doppler wave should be aligned to the LVOT parallelly, and it should be 5-chamber, and this position of the pulse wave signal should be for calculating the LVOT velocity, it should be 5 to 10 mm below the aortic valve, and sweep speed should be 100 mm per second. And we should measure the LVOT diameter 5 mm below the aortic leaflet insertion, that is 5 mm below the annulus, in zoom view and in mid systole from inner edge to inner edge for LVOT. And you should use highest trans-aortic velocity measured by continuous Doppler for aortic ASVTI. And then if you should also do this aortic valve area index to body surface area. Sometimes though aortic valve area is like between 1 or 1.2, and in patients with very obese patients, this can be still very less for them, or in vice versa also. And you should also calculate the Doppler velocity index, that is ratio of LVOT VTI to aortic valve VTI. And coming to DSC and MDCT, DSC we have already discussed. We should do only low dose DSC protocol, that is 2.5 to 5 mics per kg per minute. It's not mg, mics per kg per minute. Then we should gradually increase. And MDCT also we should calculate. That criteria we have already discussed, like 1200 for women and 2000 for men. And what is the underlying physiology between low flow, low gradient severe AS and pseudo severe AS? In low flow, low gradient severe AS, the primary culprit is the valve disease, and LV dysfunction can be concomitant phenomena or secondary to because of afterload mismatch. Whereas in pseudo severe AS, they are deemed to have myocardial disease, and AS severity is overestimated because of incomplete opening of the valve in relation to the low flow state. And in patients with the true severe AS generally benefit from AVR, and whereas pseudo severe AS may not have much benefit. That's why this differentiating from true severe AS and pseudo severe AS is essential. And the indication of dobutamine stress echo is a class 2A indication. For assessing, we should assess flow reserve. You should also assess change in effective orifice area, and the change in gradient. And what are the responses like true AS? Among true AS patients will have contractile or flow reserve or no flow reserve. And you should also differentiate from pseudo severe AS. Coming to classical, that is low flow, low gradient severe AS with LV dysfunction. This group of patients are EF less than 50, peak gradient is less than 40, and orifice area, that is aortic valve area, is less than 1. With the dobutamine stress echo, if stroke volume increases by 20%, there is LV flow reserve. If it doesn't increase more than 10%, flow reserve is less. And then you should also assess the effective, or that is aortic valve area during this. If the aortic valve area is still less than 1, it is true severe AS. The aortic valve area increases to more than 1 or more than 1.2, it is called as pseudo severe AS, because with the increase in contractility, increase in flow, even the aortic valves have opened well. That's why the aortic valve area is more than 1. And in patients with stroke volume less than stroke volume flow reserve is less than 20, there is no flow reserve, that is increase in stroke volume is less than 20%. These are a group of patients with a true severe AS as defined by aortic valve area is less than 1. These people will have high surgical mortality compared to the patients with a reserve, good low flow reserve, good LV flow reserve. So how do we assess the LV contractile or flow reserve? Patients with low flow reserve are defined as percent increase in stroke volume. If it is increasing more than 20% during DSC, these patients, they have categorized as having flow reserve. Whereas people who are not having more than 20% increase, they are categorized no flow reserve. Why do we need to differentiate between these two groups? Is people with flow reserve will have less operative mortality of 5 to 8%, whereas people with no flow reserve will have high operative mortality of 22 to 33%. And these people represent about 30 to 40% of patients with the classical low flow, low gradient AS. And there is, like, these people have found to have even a high prevalence of multivessel CAD also. And which is better term, like flow reserve is utilized rather than the contractile reserve, because this flow reserve depends upon not only the contractility, there are other parameters which also define about the flow reserve, that are afterload mismatch. There is imbalance between the severity of stenosis and myocardial reserve, or inadvocate increase in the myocardial blood flow due to associated CAD, or reversible myocardial damage because of prior myocardial infarction or myocardial fibrosis. There was one study which reported that patients with no flow reserve who survived operation, a post-operative improvement in LVEF and late survival rate was good in patients with flow reserve and much better in those with no flow reserve. treated medically. So if you, even though patients with no flow reserve have higher risk with the surgery, if they successfully undergo surgery and they survive the surgery, the more the chance of survival is much better compared to the patients who are kept on medical treatment only. That is, this you can see the bottom page left side. If patients survive operation, improve symptoms and increase in EF, they have 90% 3-year survival rate. That's why we still advise surgery for these patients, even though they have high risk. And there is another group, like some patients may have ambiguous response with DSC. That is, P gradient may not increase more than 40. It will still be less than 40 even with a dobutamine stress echo, and however EOA is less than 1. So in these patients, we should use this projected effective orifice area. This is calculated by, like, this is the graph showing effective orifice area and mean transvalvular gradient. So the normal aortic valve flow rate, transvalvular flow rate is around 250. That's why we have taken the what is the projected valve area at 250. Like these people have not achieved the flow rate of 250. That's why their effective orifice area is not whatever we see is not correct. That's why we estimate the effective orifice area at flow rate of 250. This is calculated by, like, slope. This EOA projected is equal to EOA at rest plus this this formula, that is valve compliance. What is valve compliance? Valve compliance is the change in effective orifice area. For example, if orifice area of patients is 0.6, it has increased to 0.8 with the DSC. This is the change in orifice area, and at the same time, what was the baseline flow rate and at what rate this change in orifice area was there. That is, if, for example, 200. So you can calculate as the change was valve compliance. This 200 divided by some change in flow. Sorry, 0.15, that is change in the valve area divided by change in flow. It is coming to 0.0021. Then this is called as valve compliance. This same as slope. Then you should, you are estimating a 250 flow rate, and you should also see what is the resting flow rate of that patient. For example, if the resting flow rate of the patient is 130, then 250 minus 130. This is how you calculate the projected EOA.
Venki, hello.
Yeah.
This in this projected aortic wall area, like the upper limit is 1.2, no? Like you have started dobutamine stress echo. Suppose your baseline area was 0.8.
Okay.
Then I think the upper limit, if while you are starting
in this study, that is the TOPAZ study, there are multiple studies, because some studies have taken 1.2 as a cutoff, some studies have taken 1. There is no like more, because this is the some contractory job. They tell that some 1.2 you should take as a severe AS, considering the like the risk and MACE events in these patients. Some studies have taken 1.2 as a criteria. Some studies, and most of the studies have taken 1 as a criteria.
No, like suppose baseline area is 0.9, and
Okay.
suppose low dose dobutamine, the area goes to 1.4. Then I think we can classify it as a pseudo severe AS, no?
Pseudo severe AS, yeah. 1.2. Most of some studies have taken 1.2. If it is less than 1.2, they classify them under true severe AS. If it is more than 1.2, they classify under
borderline case where we will calculate projected wall area.
No, projected valve area will calculate especially for patients in whom the gradient has not increased to 40. Like,
correct. So
we have not achieved the desired flow rate.
Suppose gradient is 30, but if your the aortic wall area increase from 0.6 to 0.9, then you will still calculate this formula. But suppose from 0.9 to it has increased to 1.4, and still the gradient is less than 40, then there is no need for a projected wall area. No, it is there.
Yes.
Correct.
Provided this EOA is less than the criteria, like less than 1, then you calculate the projected valve area.
No, Venki, actually, projected valve area, they still say that, see, to differentiate pseudo severe AS, you still need some amount of a good flow. So they say the best discernibility of that projected valve area is at a flow rate of 250. So if you at a flow rate of 250, if you have a gradient which is less than 40 and you're still not very sure whether it is because the flow has not increased and if the contractile reserve has not been achieved, then when you're calculating a projected valve area at a 250 flow rate, if you have a AVA which is falling less than 1.2, then you can call it a true severe AS. That's what is the current consensus. But if you take less than 1, then your specificity will increase, sensitivity will drop. That's how it is.
Okay. But what they have not specifically did these are like one, some studies have taken as 1 and some studies have taken as 1.2. But what is in the guidelines?
Guidelines, it says 1.2. Generally, in all the flowcharts where projected area AVA is used, AVA projected less than 1.2 is severe. Yeah.
Okay. So coming to the prognosis of these patients with the classical low flow low gradient AS, that is group 1, this red color line is patients with no flow reserve. This blue one is patients with the flow reserve. Group 1 is patients with flow reserve and these patients with medical management, they have worse prognosis compared to surgical valve replacement. And I have interchanged that group 1 is patients with a flow reserve, group 2 is patients with no flow reserve. So group 1 people, you can just correct that. Patients with flow reserve has better survival compared to the patients with no flow reserve. Coming to paradoxical low flow low gradient AS, this paradoxical low flow low gradient AS is because the flow is reduced, the gradient is less, but somehow they have normal EF. The reason being the increase in the myocardial thickness, that is concentric hypertrophy, that maintains the EF. But however, other parameters like other advanced tests of assessing the LV function, like by strain or tissue Doppler imaging, these are impaired in these patients. The reason for this are myocardial fibrosis, restrictive physiology, small LV cavity. This is similar to diastolic heart failure and impaired longitudinal strain. So what are the alternative tests to EF? That is valvulo-arterial impedance or MPI or tissue Doppler index, strain imaging, and CT AV calcium scoring and BNP values. What is we'll discuss on valvulo-arterial impedance. That is, it's a measurement of total afterload, like afterload from the valve and afterload because of the because of the vascular afterload and valvular afterload. So this is calculated by systolic blood pressure plus mean AV gradient divided by stroke volume index. So if it is more than 3.5, especially more than 4.5, suggests that these are more towards the paradoxical low flow low gradient AS. This second diagram is like they have net, that is valvular load plus arterial load. The valvular load is the net gradient, that is peak to peak gradient, and this systolic arterial pressure. So how do you evaluate this low flow low gradient AS? Apart from this, you should assess the symptoms that we have gone through 4 steps. One is avoiding the measurement errors. Then second one is symptoms, and then other like avoiding testing for other parameters like hypertension. And the fourth one is testing the calcium score. These parameters. So this is criteria was given by Baumgartner et al. So especially in patients with if these parameters, there are high likelihood of severe aortic stenosis, and in patients with the AVA less than 1 and mean gradient less than 40 with presence of preserved ejection fraction. The clinical criteria is typical symptoms without other explanation, and even elderly patients more than 70 years. And qualitative criteria is LVH and reduced LV strain. And quantitative criteria is if the gradient is between 30 to 40 or aortic valve area is less than 0.8 and stroke volume index is less than 35, which was confirmed by either cardiac MRI or 3D TEE. And calcium score. This calcium score also, which we commonly use, is likely parameter, that is men more than 2000 and women more than 1200 to increase the sensitivity. Whereas the first one, very likely the parameters is if it is more than 3000 in men and more than 1600 in women. If it is, and severe AS is unlikely if it is less than 1600 in men and less than 800 in women.
This MSMR AF also will come under this only, no? Associated.
Associated, but this criteria was that MSMR other valvular lesions was not included in this Baumgartner criteria. This is given in ESC guidelines.
That is okay, but paradoxical will also be done. The MSMR AF also will cause this, no?
No, MSMR, they'll reduce the overall flow rate, especially other valvular lesions like MSMR will reduce the flow rate, and AF will also reduce the flow rate across the aortic wall. That's why it can cause the underestimation of the aortic gradient.
So EF will be maintained. So they also will be paradoxical.
Yes. This is again, we have already discussed these things. Paradoxical low flow, low gradient. Aortic valve area less than 1, P gradient less than 40, EF more than 50. Should rule out measurement errors, and then we should rule out the small body size. Like we should calculate the aortic valve area index. If it is less than, especially if it is less than 0.6, it is a severe AS. If it is more than 0.6, it is unlikely to be severe AS. And other parameters like stroke volume index, end diastolic diameter, if it is less than 47, and relative wall thickness if it is more than 0.5, and this total impedance if it is more than 4.5, and end diastolic volume index if it is less than 55, that is small volume LV volumes, and GLS less than 15. If all these if many of these parameters are present, you should consider the paradoxical low flow AS. If these parameters are absent, you should consider further evaluate like more chance of pseudo or not moderate AS. How do you manage these patients? As per ACC, this low flow, low gradient AS, the indication of AVR is class 2A, both for flow reserve patients without flow reserve. Whereas under ESC, patients with low flow, low gradient with the flow reserve, that is more than 20% increase in stroke volume, that is class 1 indication for AVR. Whereas without flow reserve, it is class 2A indication. Coming to paradoxical D3, it is paradoxical AS, that is class 2A indication among both. And the last category, that is normal flow, low gradient severe AS. That is flow is normal. The stroke volume index is more than 35, but still the gradient is less than 40, and aortic valve area is less than 1. And indexed aortic valve area is also less than 0.6 centimeters square per meter square. This category might be due to inherent discrepancies in the guideline criteria of severe AS. That is, aortic valve area cutoff of 1 centimeter square for dividing AS severe does not correspond to the mean gradient of 40, but it corresponds to the 30 to 35 mm of HG. And other explanation is these people, this can also occur in patients with a small body size, that is moderate AS, the small body surface area. If you calculate the index, it will be more than 0.6. And prolonged ejection time, that is normal stroke volume index, but reduced transvalvular flow or reduced aortic compliance, and that is sclerotic, that is elderly patients, and systolic hypertension also. And approach to management of these patients is similar to that of paradoxical low flow, low gradient AS. Okay, then.
So systemic hypertension does not come under paradoxical low flow, low gradient, no?
No, if EF is normal, and if gradient is less than 40, and systolic pressure, if systolic blood pressure if is less than 140, then more chance of being a paradoxical AS. If systolic blood pressure is more than 140, the measured gradient is less because of increased arterial systolic arterial pressure. Whatever the gradient we measure is the difference between LV systolic pressure and aortic systolic pressure. So if aortic systolic pressure is more, the gradient measured will be obviously less. So if you should control the hypertension, then reassess the patients.
Okay, so controlling the hypertension reassessing will that is done in the case of normal flow, low gradient severe AS. In paradoxical, it is with LVH or anything like that, isn't it?
Yeah, even in paradoxical also, both the patients, you should control the hypertension and reassess.
Okay.
Less than 140 is the cutoff at the time of measuring.
Less than 140.
Anything more than 140 can cause, I mean, as we can understand, gradient is because Venki showed that no, the compliance, arterial compliance will cause decrease in gradient. Venki, this last line which you have mentioned, no? Where is that from? Where it says that normal
It is
flow,
from,
low gradient should be treated similar to paradoxical low flow, low gradient?
This is from Kerala Journal of Kerala Journal. That is an valvular heart disease they have given.
I don't think it is actually correct to generalize like that. See, one more category where this can happen. There is a lot of discussion regarding flow around aortic valve. The person who has actually done a lot of research on this is Lancelotti. So he has published in one journal a very good editorial. I have that. I'll share this. So what he says is that AVA, when it is less than 1, which means we are thinking of a severe AS, you can categorize them into 4 possible categories, where he says that it is 4 permutation combinations of low flow, high gradient. There is one entity called low flow, high gradient also, actually. So it is low flow, low gradient, which is what we have discussed all the way now. And it can be low flow, high gradient, or again, high flow, low gradient. And it is not high flow, low gradient also can happen. That's what you have written. High flow, and this is normal flow, low gradient, which is what you have discussed just now. And what we truly see is normal flow, normal gradient. It's not, high gradient actually. So those 4 combinations can be there. What he says is that apart from all the causes you have mentioned now for this normal flow, low gradient, normal flow, low gradient, of all the causes you have mentioned, there is one more cause which they have, their group specifically has found when they followed up patients, is that when aortic stenosis develops, before the ventricle has had the time to remodel, and like if you pick them up early, as soon as it has moved past into that AVA of less than 1, in that initial period, they can have a low gradient apparently. So, which means to say that it could also represent a portion of people who are early, picked up early. I'm not saying that you should wait and watch on them, but it is a proportion of people who can actually become what they mean to say is that AVA reduction to less than 1 happens along the way, and after that there will be some delay before the gradient actually moves beyond 40, according to the guidelines. That's what they mean to say. So they have a better outcome. They found that they have lesser BNP levels, they have lesser LV problems when they do a cardiac imaging and also strain imaging, and their strains are much better preserved. So they overall represent a very favorable group. So other thing which actually that group described, which is not actually very commonly talked about that day, even when Gaurav presented, actually Ravindranath sir was asking. So if just like that, if somebody has read about this, they might ask. Otherwise, we don't need to mention this in the exam. But just for our discussion's sake, there is a group called low flow, high gradient. So what is a low flow, high gradient is nothing but a patient who has a high gradient, but the flow is reduced because of a and he has been flow is reduced because of an LV dysfunction, but that LV dysfunction is not evident in the EF measurements, because current day and age we basically call them a normal EF or low EF based on only ejection fraction, which is actually a very crude way of assessing LV systolic function, they say. So there can be a lot of things with respect to abnormal remodeling of LV, where the endocardial excursion, which is what we measure in EF, can be preserved, but the actual amount of stroke volume coming out might be low. So they say that there is actually a role in especially good number of patients. And in their group, they found that it was present in 7%, 7 to 8% of patients had this entity of low flow, where SVI is less than 35 millimeters per meter square, but gradients were above 40. So that group had significantly higher Monin's risk score. So this Monin, Monin is a guy who has basically come up with basically a risk score which is not very widely accepted, but in papers they keep mentioning. Whenever you see papers on asymptomatic aortic stenosis, severe or basically with a low flow, paradoxical low flow, you will come across this term called Monin's risk score, MONIN. So what is Monin's risk score is basically it gives you a 4 quartiles based on what they have taken into consideration is BNP, true velocity of the aortic valve, whatever you're finding, and sex. They say that females have a higher risk of worse outcomes than males in AF generally. So if you have a higher 2 quartiles. So they have divided the patients into 4 quartiles, and they found they give low, intermediate, and high risk group. What that score predicts is that the chance of in the next 20 months, the chance of actually you developing symptoms, because we are talking about this risk score only in the terms of asymptomatic severe AS. So the chance of you developing symptoms or chance of you developing a positive exercise test and being referred for surgery. So both these two things are predicted by this score, and it has a very good correlation coefficient. And in the sense that they found that this low flow high gradient groups has a very high risk, high Monin score when they were found in that article. And so they can actually have worse outcomes if you find a patient who is having a normal flow versus if you're having a low flow, you will want to not wait in the case of a normal flow, especially even irrespective of low flow, irrespective of whatever his other parameters are, because they found that all these exercise testing, all these have a lot of significant sensitivity issues as compared to doing imaging nowadays. So nowadays it's more of going into evaluating a clinical damage which has been done by the aortic valve, especially in asymptomatic aortic stenosis. So already in ESA guidelines we have BNP levels which is already there, and slowly LGE and and there is a concept of replacement versus diffuse fibrosis which is come. Replacement is already too late, they say. So in the light of all that, there is this new entity of low flow and high gradient. I think few of us should know that in case somebody specifically who has read about this may ask. So it is actually there in few of the flow charts. And I think even when Gaurav mentioned that in his hemodynamic class in AS, sir was like, how can there be a high gradient and a low flow? But there is an entity like that. I will put up that editorial in our group. Interested people can go through it also.
Okay.
Dimpu.
Yeah, Varshit.
See, this thing at the start of this talk, what Venki mentioned was, suppose you have a concordant findings like wall area less than 1 and gradient more than 40.
Yeah.
And this thing, peak velocity more than 4. If you have all these three things, then you need not to go ahead. You can go ahead with the, like, depending on the symptom status, tower or surgical replacement. Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
Now, in this entity of low flow, high gradient AS, what it means that you will have a high gradient. You will also have a low wall area. So, anyways, like if he is symptomatic at that stage, we have to shift him for surgery. But if he is asymptomatic, then what you are telling, or what that paper or whatever it is that literature is telling is, you should calculate stroke volume also, so that you can find out the flow status. Correct?
No? See, what Lancelotti says and their group believes is that in all patients with AVA less than 1 and asymptomatic status, it is better to characterize them what is their hemodynamic status, even though if they have a high gradient. So I mean, whether irrespective of the gradient, it is better to put them into one of these 4 hemodynamic groups, which is based on flow and gradients, because EF is actually too late by the time EF drops. That is what this concept revolves around, essentially. So
basically they want to target those asymptomatic population where you may have the discrepancies.
So when it comes to five group of patients, no, like normal flow high gradient, low flow high gradient, paradoxical low flow low gradient, classical low flow low gradient, normal flow low gradient. So it will be
This
5
normal flow low gradient not often mentioned, I think.
No, normal flow low gradient can be there. That's what even that
that is early form of paradoxical low flow low gradient.
Not often mentioned.
No, paradoxical low flow low gradient won't come in that, Vinky. Basically,
normal flow.
I mean, I'll put that up actually. See, the normal flow low gradient group is one group where you actually have misdiagnosed more often, like for the reasons you said. One is that they fall in that 0.8 to 1. 0.8 to 1 category. The way it is calculated, inherent discrepancy is what even that paper also says. And other thing is, if in a small body surface area where AVA less than 1 could still mean that indexed area is more than 0.6, which is why it is explained. However, and some technical issues like with not taking care of hypertension and measuring it and those kind of so forth. And also mentions that basically there is a lag when you do a natural history analysis. There is a lag before the AVA dropping and actually gradients going up. So you may have picked them up in that category. So at which time their outcomes with surgery are much better than actually if you do it for a patient whose gradient has increased. So which means that if you put them in the prognostic categories, no, if like they say that, I mean, in that paper it mentions that actually you will, if you take all the patients with AVA less than 1 and follow them up, like because they have done a lot of natural history studies, Lancelotti group on AS. So when they found that actually there are as many number of patients with a normal flow low gradient as many are there are with high normal flow and high gradient, basically like normal AS what we see every day. Like flow is normal, EF is normal, gradient is more than 40, and AVA is less than 1. So if you see 38% of those, you see almost 30% of this last entity which you have mentioned is what they say. Because when you follow them up continuously, you may come across a few people who will later again get subcategorized into this category of having a normal flow high gradient. Normal flow low gradient. From low gradient they go on to high gradient once the remodeling happens and the gradient pushes up itself as a compensatory mechanism. That's what they say. But these other two entities are actually like, be it low flow low gradient or be it low flow high gradient, both those are seen approximately in 8 to 10%. They say 8 to 10% for low flow low gradient, and low flow high gradient category can be also seen in 7%. Some groups have even mentioned it as actually 20%, but that entity is there. It's not like it is not there and you won't get it. What it means is that the same way actually the LV can lag in pushing the gradient up, the same way the EF will lag behind the stroke volume in or the flow when we calculate in actually manifesting the LV dysfunction. That's what they want to say. So in a patient with AS, because of the overload afterload mismatch, the LV will go into dysfunction, but EF is one of the last things which will go down. Before that, a lot of things happen. Before that, the low flow first starts to drop. Then there will be a fibrosis, which is the reason for this displacement, which can be picked up by MRI. And also the strain will start to drop. So they say if you put them in the order, the strain, tissue imaging in the form of MRI is actually very sensitive first to pick up, and then the BNP goes up, they say, and then this strain starts to drop, and then finally EF drops. So the recent guidelines, though AHA has not accepted that in 2017, soon in 2020 or 21 they are actually planning to revise it to include all this subclinical markers, because they've had more than equivocal evidence to suggest that they improve outcomes when used in clinical practice for patients who are asymptomatic severe AS. Whether this Monin's risk score will get added or not, I'm not sure, but most of these asymptomatic risk score studies which have been done have mentioned where with Monin risk score these people fall.
Okay.
Okay then. Thanks, Venki. Thanks for the topics.
Thank you.
Nice discussion. Okay then. See you.
Thank you, Venkatesh.